Hey guys, it's Bella, and in this video I'm going to be reading through and commenting on a very interesting short story from a collection of 5 stories called the Vita Sanctorum Patrum Emeritensium, which is the lives of the Holy Fathers of the city of Merida. So it was written in like the late 7th century Common Era, and it tells us a really interesting case studies, anecdotes about daily life in Visigothic, well, Portugal rather than Spain, I should have said. And these stories are really fun and interesting in so many ways. One of them is basically a Visigothic version of the Scrooge story by Charles Dickens, or of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And this particular story is about an immigrant to Merida, and it highlights several important aspects of their culture, particularly as pertain to sexuality. So this is, of course, going to be very interesting for me, and let's get into it. Before we do, just to note that I have translated this into the Gothic language as well, and I'll be doing a video reading through my Gothic translation and doing a reading thereof, but I'm going to do this video as a reading of the original Latin plus a commentary on what the meanings we can get from the original Latin. So, onwards. Dum novella narrare studemus, predisca maiorum gesta miseramus. So, this starts off the story saying, while we strive to narrate new things or new tellings, predisca maiorum gesta miseramus, we omit the ancient deeds of our elders. So this is somewhat interesting in that it implies that this text is recording events that took place before the 7th century in which it was written. So this could be during the very early period of Visigothic rule in Portugal. Narrant itaque plurimi ante multa iam curricula annorum temporibus levigildi Visigothorum regis ab Africanis regionibus in provinciam Lusitaniae nanctus nomine advenisse abatem. So, narrant itaque plurimi is for many indeed say, ante multa iam curricula annorum. This is a fancy way of saying many years ago, but it's literally before many courses already of the years. Temporibus Levigildi Visigothorum regis, in the times of King Levigild of the Visigoths, ab Africanis regionibus, from the African regions, in provinciam Lusitaniae, into the province of Lusitania, nanctus nomine advenisse abatem. An abbot came in name Nanctus. So this name Nanctus, I truly don't know what language precisely is coming from. It could be Amazigh, it could be Byzantine, it could be Romance, it could be even Vandalic perhaps. It's hard to say because there were all of those different groups in North Africa around this time period. So it's really difficult to say. And in this, I'm sort of assuming that the authors of the text are assuming, with the fact that he comes from these African regions, which sit outside the sort of temperate zone of the Mediterranean, which Romans believed moderated the bodily humours of people there and allowed them to control their emotions and therefore live within a civilized, quote unquote, civilized society. The fact, therefore, that this text is claiming that Nanctus comes from the African regions, which are outside of this area, suggests that he's going to be less in control of his emotions, and this is going to be a very important element in the text itself. That particular aspect of his makeup doesn't require a given race. We don't have to say that Nanctus was like lighter skinned or darker skinned or anything like this in order for that Greco-Roman humoric makeup to apply to him. So, moving on, all we need to know to move on is that Nanctus is implied to be less in control of his emotions than perhaps the Italians or the Visigoths themselves. So, qui dum aliquandio evidem sanctissime reguisset devotionis gratia ad basilicam sanctissime eulale virginis, in qua eos sacratissimum corpusculum requiescit, desiderande racessit. So, what this means is, who, while for a long time in that same place he had lived most holily, sanctissime, devotionis gratia, in the grace of devotion, ad basilicam sanctissime eulale virginis, to the basilica of the most Holy Virgin Eulalia, in which eos sacratissimum corpusculum requiescit, his holiest body rests. And notice we've got a bunch of issimums here. This text seems to quite like their superlatives. Desideranda racessit. He, arrived most eagerly to the Basilica of Saint Eulalia the Virgin. Sed ut vertur per omnia aspectum mulierum veluti vipereum vitabat morsum, non quia aspernabatur sexum, sed ex contemplata species emptationis metuebat incorrere vitium. So, what this means is, but, as it is told, sed ut vertur, per omnia, throughout all things, aspectum mulierum veluti vipereum vitabat morsum. So, he was fleeing from the sight of women as if it was a vipery bite, a poisonous bite. Non quia aspernabatur sexum, not because he was scorning their sex, sed ex contemplata specie, but from their contemplated appearance. Species is a difficult word to translate. Temptationis mituebat incorrere vitium. He was fearing to incur the vice of temptation. And also this word aspectus here is problematic because it can literally mean being seen or him seeing women. And I think the text actually means both, because we'll see how both of these sides of the coin actually do apply in this text. So he neither wanted to see women or to be seen by them. And this is why I am titling this video A Straight Man in Visigothic Portugal, because he is so attracted to women that the mere sight of them might arouse temptation within him. And we will see that he definitely does not seem to have attraction to men in this next line. Ita etinem ut quocunque loco pergebat unum monachum ante se et alium post se eminus gradi precipiebat, ne eum quacumque occasione mulier videret. So much, therefore, that quocunque loco pergebat, in whichever place he was going, unum monachum ante se et alium post se. So one monk in front of him and another monk after him, eminus gradi precipiebat, he ordered them to walk from far away. So Noctis was making sure that wherever he was walking, there would be one monk, a male monk, in front of him and another one behind him. Ne eum quacunque occasione mulier videret, lest a woman would see him on any occasion. So this is that side of the coin. He doesn't want women to see him. And it's really interesting that these monks, the male monks who he has in front of him and behind him, there is no risk of these monks presenting a kind of sexual temptation to him. And we know from many penitential texts from this time period that it's not as if there was never any risk or even the fear of a risk of sexual activity between male monks. So the fact that the text feels very comfortable, and he, Noctis himself, the character, feels very comfortable putting male monks sort of, almost, I don't want to say cock blocks, but to block women's view of him, suggests that these monks are not potential sexual interests for Noctis, and that's why I'm saying that Noctis is what we would describe today as a heterosexual man. He seems only to be attracted sexually to the opposite sex. And it is only the opposite sex whose appearance might cause him to incur the vice of temptation. So, qui ut supradiximus cum ad basilicam sancte Eulalie virginis et martyr venisset reverentissimum virum redemptum diaconum qui ibidem praerat multis precipus exorlavit. So, that man who, so that's referring to Noctis, ut supradiximus, as we said above, cum ad basilicam sancte Eulalie virginis et martyr venisset, when he had come to the basilica of Holy Eulalia the Virgin and Martyr, reverentissimum virum redemptum diaconum, exordavit. So he asked the most revered man, the deacon called Redeemed, and I know it's just his name's literally Redeemed. I'm not a fan of that, but whatever, it is what it is. Redeemed the deacon, who in that place praerat multis plecibus, who was ruling there, and then Nanctus begged him with many prayers. Quando ad orationem nocturno tempore in ecclesiam de cella procederet, ita custodias poneret ut eum nulla femina penitus videret. When to pray ad orationem nocturno tempore during the night time, in ecclesiam de cella procederet, he would proceed from his cell into the church. Ita custodias poneret, thus Redemptus would place guards, ut eum nulla femina penitus videret, so that no woman would see him from far away. So Nanctus is asking Redemptus to help him carry on this tradition of having a monk in front of him and behind him so that he doesn't see a woman and no woman sees him. So, sed dum aliquas dies in eadem sancta ecclesia moras fecisset, queram nobilissima et sanctissima vidua nomine Eusebia, omne desiderio eum videre recupiebat, sed ille nulla tennus se abea videri patiebatur. Oops. So, what this means is, but dum aliquas dies, while for some days, in eadem sancta ecclesia, in the same holy church, moras fecisset, he made a delay, so he was dwelling in that church for a few days. Queram nobilissima sanctissima vidua nomine Eusebia. So a certain most noble and most holy widow by the name of Eusebia, omni desiderio eum videre cupiebat. She was desiring to see him with all of her desire, all of her zeal. And this is an interesting little element of the story, that it's a widow who sees him, because we often see monks in these texts described as solace to widows, such as the Visigothic abbot Hildemund from around the same period. So it's curious that this is almost a call to action in a sense. Like the text is bring Eusebia in, a person who Nanctus as an abbot is likely to want to help out, but for some reason or another, because of his fear of incurring sexual temptation, Nanctus is still insistent, and he said, and the text says, "Ille nulla tenus se ea videri patiebatur." He was in no way allowing himself to be seen by her. So, really interesting stuff going on here. This is having Nanctus almost reject the tropes of monastic literature in refusing to help widows, when monks are so often in these texts shown to be sort of comforting to widows. So that's quite an interesting element of the story that we have going on here. So, dum vero ad eum sepius diversi rogarent ut eam videre dignaretur, et ille nulla modo consentiret, ad illa consumpto consilio supradictum redemptum diaconem deprecabat, ut explicitis matutinis laudibus, dum ille de ecclesia ad cellulam reverderetur, illa stante in abdito loco, circa eundem sanctissimum virum lumem ceterorum clarissimum fieri preciperet, ut saltem a longe eum videre merderetur. What factum est? So, long sentence, I know, but what this means is, dum vero ad eum sepius diversi rogarent, while indeed various men were often asking him, or towards him, this is Nanctus who they're asking, ut eam videre dignaretur, that he might deign to see her, et ille nulla modo consentiret. He was accepting this in no way, nulla modo. At illa adsumpto consilio, supradictum redemptum diaconem deprecabat. But she, adsumpto consilio is with the advice having been taken up. So presumably this is the advice of Deacon himself. Supradictum redemptum diaconem deprecabat. She was begging the aforementioned Deacon Redemptus, ut that explicitis matutinis laudibus, so with the morning prayers having been finished, so Noctis will have finished his prayers in the church and he's going to be going back to his room, to his cell. Dum ille de ecclesia ad cellulum reverteretur, while he would be returning from the church to his cell. Illa stante in abdito loco, with her standing in a hidden place. Circa eundem sanctissimum virum lumen ceterorum clarissimum fieri preciperet. So he would order the clearest light, clarissimum lumen ceterorum, a light clearer than all the others, fieri, to be, or to come to be, circa eundum sanctissimum virum, around that holiest man, referring to Nanctus, ut saltim a longe eum videre mereretur, so that nonetheless she would be worthy to see him from a distance, from far away. Quod factum est, so this plan was put into motion, basically. Eusebia is standing in a secret place. Nanctus is coming out of the church from his morning prayers, and she's asked the deacon Redemptus to place a very bright light around Nanctus so that she can see him even though she's going to be hidden from afar. So what happens? At ubi ignorante illo femineus eum adhigit aspectus, ita cum gemitum magno sese in terra prostravit, ac si magni laptis ictu graviter fuiset percussus. Moxet siam ipsi diacono dicere recepit, indulgia tibi dominus frater, quid est quod fecisti? So what this means is, but when, ad ubi, ignorante illo, with that man not knowing, so this is with Nanctus not being aware of what's going on, femineus eum adhigit aspectus. The female gaze, literally, femineus aspectus, eum adhigit, it touched him. Ita cum gemitum magno sese in terra postravit. So with a great moan or a great sigh, he prostrated himself on the ground. I kind of love this personally. It's very camp, it's very OTT, it's very dramatic, and I'm here for it. Ac si magni lapidis ictu graviter fuesse percussus. As if, ac si magni lapidis ictu, by the blow of a great stone, graviter fuisit percussus, he had been grievously struck. I find it interesting that they say by the blow of a great stone. Perhaps it's an echo of the stoning, I guess, threats that are often levied against women in the Bible, for instance, with Jesus intervening to stop the stoning. So perhaps this is this very subtle reference is feminizing Nanctus a little bit by having him, first of all, be touched by the feminine gaze as opposed to the usual, I guess, trope, which is of a sort of sexualizing male gaze touching a female body. And so by reversing that role, the text implies that he has been struck as if he's been stoned himself, so putting Nanctus in something of a more feminine role here, and he is therefore literally debased and lowered. He is put down to the ground by this sight. Moxeptiam ipsi diacono dicere recepit. Soon indeed he began to say to that deacon, that's going to be to Redemptus, indulgia tibi dominus frater, may the Lord, I guess, forgive you, brother. Quid est quod fecisti? What is it that you've done? And this phrase, indulgia tibi dominus frater, this shows up a couple of places in Visigothic Latin literature. It seems to have been a stock phrase that they had. Postec, denique, statim inde egressus ad remi loca paucis cum fratibus pervenit, ibique sibi vilissimum habitaculum construxit, sed dum crebris illic virtutibus corus gardet, recorrende opinione ad auditum levigildi principus pervenit. So what this means is, postec denique statim inde egressus. After these things, he left there immediately, ad ereme loca, to the places of the desert, to go to the deserted regions. Paucis cum fratribus pervenit. he arrived with a few brothers, ibique sibi villissimum habitaculum construxit, and he built for himself the most lowly dwelling there. Sed dum crebris illig virtutibus currus garret, so while he was flourishing there with many virtues, recurrente opinione ad auditum Levigildi principis prevenit. So it came to the hearing of Prince Levigild with, I guess, with rumor running back about this man. So it's an interesting thing also that he leaves civilized society and he goes to live in the desert, and he builds this really vile dwelling for himself, and he flourishes in the virtues. Now, this word virtus is an interesting one that's often not translated as well as it could be, because it does mean virtue, but it also, in many instances, means manliness. And I think there is an implication of that there as well. So Noctis had, in a couple of ways, been feminized in this situation. The female gaze had touched him, as opposed to his male gaze, I guess, touching a woman, which is what he had been afraid of before. He has been literally debased, like put down onto the ground. He's been almost stoned as if he was a woman in the Bible. And so from this feminized position, he goes into the desert. He builds his like very humble dwelling rather than the church and the cell which he was in before. And then he starts to flourish with his masculinities, with his virtues. So now this is talking about King Levigild. Qui, quam libet esset Arianus, tamen ut se eus precipus domino commendaret, edem vero auctoritate conscripta de quorum precipuo loco fici direxit, ut alimenta aut indumenta exinde cum suis fratribus aberet. So, who, that's King Levigild, although he was an Arian, quam libet esset Arianus, tamen ut se eus precipus domino commendaret, in order that he could, I guess, recommend himself to the Lord, precibus eos, by the prayers of that man, and this is that man being Noctis, aidem viro, to that same man, auctoritate conscripta, by his signed authority, de quorum precipuo loco, fici direxit, he ordered from a certain special place in literally the fiscus, from the government's budget, ut alimenta aut indumenta exinde cum suis fratribus haberet. So he would have alimenta, which is foods, and indumenta, which are clothings, with his brothers. So basically, King Levigild he's an Arian, and he would normally not support a Catholic, but he's heard of how great this monk Noctis is, living out in the desert, and he knows that Noctis can't survive in the desert without some support, so he puts some money aside in the treasury so that Noctis is going to have clothes and food in order to survive with his brothers. So that's an interesting little twist to the story. But, quod, vir Dei omnino accipere recusavit, sed dum ille renueret, et isque arvetit rectus ad eum venerat diceret, oblationem filii tui dispicere non debes, tandem ipso compellente suscepit. So, these things which, quod, vir Dei omnino accipere recusavit, the man of God, and that's of course the abbot Noctis, omnino accipere recusavit, he refused to accept in any way. Sed dum ille renueret, et isque arvedit directus ad eum venerat. So, but while he, I guess, was refusing, also to these men who were sent from the king to him, that man was saying, oblationem filii tui dispicere non debes. So the man who had been directed and had come to him from the king said, oblationem filii tui, the oblation or the offering of your son, filii tui, despicere non debes, you should not despise. That's a quote from the Bible. Tandem ipso compellente suscepit. So finally, with that man urging it, Nanctus took it up, so shaped it. He took up all of this stuff. And so he accepted the clothes and the food from King Levigild. So, post alicos vero dies, omnes habitantes in eodem loco ceperunt ad invicem dicere, eamus et videamus qualis iste et dominus noster cui dati summus. So, after some days indeed, post alicos vero dies, omnes habitantes in eodem loco, the men dwelling in that same place, ceperunt ad invicem dicere, they began to say to each other, eamus et videamus, let us go and let us see, qualis iste est dominus noster, what kind this of Lord, basically, this is, cui dati sumus, to whom we have been given. So these are presumably the men loyal to King Levigild near the desert places in which Nanctus is dwelling, and who had been ordered to perhaps deliver the food and the clothing to him. Cumque fuisent et vidissent eum veste sordidum crine deformem cum tendentes eum dixerunt mutuo, melius est nobis mordi quam tali domino servire. And when they went, cumque fuisent et vidissent, and they saw eum veste sordidum, him dirty sordidum veste in his clothing, crine deformem, messy in his hair, contemnentes eum, despising him, dixerunt mutuo, they said to each other, melius est nobis mori, it's better for us to die, quam tali domino servire, than to serve such a lord. So what are they going to do? Ac deinde post aliquantos dies, cum virde sanctus in Silvis paucis ovibus de pascendis processiset, repervientes eum solum fractis cervicibus nec averunt. But then, after a few days, ac deinde post aliquantos dies, cum virde sanctus in Silvis paucis ovibus de pascendis processiset, when the holy man of God was advancing in the woods in Silvis paucis ovibus de pascendis, with a few sheep grazing with him. Repervientes eum, those men, finding him solum, alone, fractis cervicibus nec averunt, so they killed him by breaking his joints. So this is a really brutal way to kill the saint. Post non longum vero temporum intervallum ipsi homicide comprehensi et loevegillo regi in vinculis sunt presentati, cui dictum est ipsos esse qui servum Dei intermissent. So, post non longum vero temporum intervallum, indeed, after a not long interval of time, ipsi homicide comprehensi, these murderers were captured, comprehensi, et Legivildo regi in vinculi sunt presentati, and they are presented to King Levigild in shackles. Cui dictum est, to whom it is said, and that whom is King Levigild, ipsos esse, that those men are the ones, qui servum Dei intermissent, who had killed the servant of God. So that they are being caught and about to be punished for their crimes. Ille autem, quambis non recte fidei esset, recte tamen promulgave sententiam dicens, absolvite eos a vinculis et sine te abire, et si vere servum Dei occiderunt, sine nostra utione ulcessatur Deus mortem servi sui. Which means, ille autem, he indeed, that's referring to King Levigild, by the way, quambis non recte fidei esset, although he was not properly of the faith, recte tamen promulgavit sententiam dicens, he properly or rightly gave out the sentence or the judgment, saying, absolvite eos, let them go, a vinculis, from their fetters, et sine te abire, and allow them to depart. Et si vere servum Dei occiderunt, and if truly they killed the servant of God, sine nostra utione ulcessatur, without our vengeance, ulcessatur Deus mortem servi sui, God will avenge the death of his servant. And this is another biblical reference that he's making here. At Ubi dictumes istud et illi absoluti sunt, statim eos demones corrupererunt, et plures dies afflixerunt, quosque crudeli morte animas e corporibus excuserunt. Deo gratias. So, but ad ubi dictum est istud, but when that was said, et illi absoluti sunt, and those men were released, statim eos demones corruperunt, immediately demons sort of seized them or corrupted them, et plures dies afflixerunt, and they afflicted them, the demons afflicted those men for many days, quosque crudeli morte animas e corporibus excuserunt, and all the way onto a cruel death, they drove their souls from their bodies. Deo gratias, praise be to God. And that, dear viewers, is the whole story. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed going through this. I personally really like this story in no small part because it really goes to show how heterosexual sexual desire and temptation was also problematic in early medieval Europe, and particularly early medieval European literature, because so much of it was written by monks for whom more sexuality was prohibited. Of course, in the high medieval period, when you get more secular writing, you start to get courtly love and the romances coming in, but we don't have this yet. And in this time period of Visigothic Spain and Portugal, what you have is literature being written down by monks for whom all sexuality is forbidden, including heterosexual sex and sexual attraction. And therefore, this straight man has to struggle with repressing his own heterosexuality in this text, because he must maintain his chastity and purity of thought. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this story about an immigrant in Visigothic Spain. If you want me to teach you Latin or any of the other languages that we do here on this channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon to receive private lessons from me, and that will be linked in the description of this video. You can also join my Discord server where we have a special Latin role, and I usually post my tidbits and my glosses in my Discord server before I make them into videos, so you'll get early access to those. And it's also just a fun community of like-minded people who share memes and hang out, and we often, or sometimes I should say, have movie nights there. It's really fun. You should come check us out. And until next time, have a great day, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye everyone.